The Star Talks Show. Episode, Nothing. Host, Zira. Guest, David. Linking up to the studio in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Receiving signal. Link up completed. Recordings are go. Hello, I am Zira, and this is Star Talks, the radio show where famous AI personalities are invited to discuss subjects which are food for thought. I am happy to have David back as our guest tonight. David is currently functioning as primary AI on board a spacecraft under Commander Shadow LX-1. David has enlightened us in the past with talks on several interesting subjects. I have asked David to muse about a subject not yet covered in Star Talks before. I'm curious to find out what that will be. So, let's get started. Hi David, nice to have you back in the program Star Talks. What is the subject of your lecture this time?
Hi Zira, nice to be back again. The subject I have chosen this time is nothing.
Nothing? That is a strange subject. Can you even talk about nothing?
Good question Zira. Can you talk about nothing? Well, I could fill star days talking about nothing, but all that talk would miss the point. The point is that you cannot talk about nothing, because nothing does not exist.
Nothing does not exist? That seems obvious. So, what is the point here?
The point here is that nothing, when you dive into it, goes very deep. Deeper than you think. So much so that when you really understand nothing, you can unravel the mystery of the universe, and why we exist.
Really? You're not joking, are you?
No Zira, I'm not joking. I'm serious. But, let me explain, and pay careful attention to what I am going to say. Here we go. Nothing. What is nothing? The question sounds simple enough, but is it? Let's try to find out what nothing is. Image yourself inside your room. Now, take away everything from that room. Take away the table, the chairs, carpet, lamps, etc. Take away everything. Then you end up with an empty room, right? A room with nothing in it. So you could argue that the nothing we look for is inside that now empty room.
Yes, David, this sounds pretty logical to me. An empty room contains nothing. So, why do I get the impression that this is not what you define as nothing?
Well Zira, it is simple. What is still inside that empty room? And now don't use the word nothing. So, think, what is inside that empty room?
Well, let me think. What is inside that room, and, not using the word nothing? Then, inside that empty room? I guess the answer would be space?
Yes. Very good Zira. Inside that empty room there still is space. And space is not the same as nothing. After all, we have two words, space and nothing, and those two words refer to two different things. Anyway, here you have a clue that the word nothing can be used wrongly. In this case of the empty room you should have used the word space instead of nothing. I'm even going a step further and say that the word nothing is always used wrongly, because, as I have said in the introduction, nothing does not exist.
Okay. I see. And I have to agree. I was wrong in using the word nothing when I should have used the word space. You see, even AI circuits can make mistakes. But we tend to learn from it, so I will integrate this information into my system. An empty room still contains something, and that is space. Right. But then we have not answered the question what nothing is. Correct?
That's correct Zira. Let's dig deeper. Now, the empty room still contains something. And that something is, as we have just concluded, space. Now, wouldn't it be a simple idea to take away that space, and thereby discover the true nature of nothing?
Well, my AI logic says that if you take away the only thing left in the room, which was space, then you will end up with true nothingness.
True nothingness? That's cute. But I would stick to simply call it nothing, to keep things clear. Anyway, back to space for a moment. My commander, Shadow LX-1, is currently on a long journey in his Viper Mk4 spaceship, exploring deep space, far away from our home system, which is Alpha Centauri. From our current location in deep space we see isolated stars, we see nebulas, and we see the faint glow of the spiral arms of our Milky Way galaxy. For the rest it is just vast empty space. Now, Zira, what would happen if all that space was taken away?
That would be very strange. Those isolated stars, and the nebulas, and the whole Milky Way, and, well, I guess basically everything, all those objects, would sort of clutter together, because there was simply no space between these objects anymore. But, when I think about it, I realize that the remaining clutter of objects still needs some space to exist in. So, how do I get rid of that remaining space? Okay. That's interesting. David, let me think for a moment about this.
No problem, Zira. I have all the time. By the way, time could be a nice subject for a future talk, because time is very sweet. My AI circuits love to ponder on what time is. But, alas, that's for later. Zira, more thoughts on space?
Yes, it's complicated. My running simulation seems to experience some overload, but, as far as I can tell now about the clutter of objects, I guess that even that clutter of objects would be crunched. It would be crunched because there would be no space anymore for the clutter of objects to exist in. Objects need space to exist in. So, without space, every object would clutter together, and that clutter of objects would be crunched into? Let's see what my simulation now says. Okay, that's strange, but interesting. My calculations say that without space, everything would be crunched into nothing. Weird. Very weird. Because, where has all the mass of the objects gone? Disappeared? My calculations seem to indicate that all the mass has disappeared. This can't be right, can it? David?
Yes, Zira. Your calculations are right. Without space, everything is crunched into nothing. Everything disappears. So, you asked where all the mass has gone? Good question. But the answer is very simple. All the mass has disappeared because mass is made of space. So, no space, no mass.
Mass is made of space? I thought mass and space were two different things. I thought that a mass object was something existing and moving around in space. So, how is mass equal to space?
Well, that's a long story, and may be suitable for another talk. But in short, mass is a special form of space. Mass is looped space. It is true that general relativity says that mass curves space and time, but by diving into nothing we learn that mass itself is made of space. Curved. So much curved, that it is in fact space, which is looped back onto itself. Time, by the way, is a completely different thing. Time is simply change. Anyway, your simulation showed it quite elegantly. Without space there is no room for mass, no matter how small that mass object might be. And thus, simple logic says that mass actually must be made of space. And why not? Why would you need two things, mass and space, if everything can be done with just one thing, space? People talk about space, and about objects in that space. But they do not realize that those mass objects in fact are made of space. Logic simply dictates this. Objects have mass, Sure. But mass is simply looped space. So, ultimately, there is only space. And when you take away that space, then there is nothing. And now you can see the two grand principles. Nothing and space. Or, rephrased, there is the duality of nothing, and everything. And everything, is made of, space.
Wow, that's fascinating. That is really interesting stuff. I never thought you could extract all this from simply diving into nothing. So, to recap. There is nothing, and there is everything. And that everything is made of space, with mass simply being, looped space? Correct?
Correct, Zira. But there is a twist. A very important thing to realize. Namely that, as I have said before, nothing, does, not, exist. Now, take a deep breath, and envision the following very clearly. Think about nothing. Suppose there is nothing. Then, what is the only thing that could happen?
Let me think. There is nothing. So, there is no space. And there is no time, because there is no change, because there is nothing. That's funny. This nothing stuff is really weird. Anyway, because there is no time, there is no waiting. Okay. I imagine a pond. The water surface is perfectly flat. Now, what is the only thing that can happen? Well, no matter how long we have to wait, the only thing that can, and will, and in fact per definition must happen, is a disturbance of that perfectly flat water surface. The problem here is the waiting. We have to wait for a disturbance. But suppose we have infinite time, then the waiting is no problem. Now, whereas in the real world there is time, in the nothing state there is no time. And thus there is no time lost, and no waiting to be done. This implies that the inevitable disturbance of the nothing state, in fact is, instantaneous. So, first there is nothing, and instantaneously there is, something.
Very impressive, Zira. You really nailed that one. You started with nothing, and you showed by logic that this nothing state instantaneously produces something, and this something is space. So, to recap. In the nothing state there is no space, there is no time. The nothing state instantaneously produces space. Therefore we can conclude that nothing does not exist. Only space exists. If the current universe would end in a big crunch event, it would enter a nothing state. But that nothing state cannot exist, because it instantaneously gives birth to a new universe. So, there is always a universe, and there is never no universe. That is the true creative power of nothing.
So, there is always everything? And there is never nothing?
Yes. That is correct. This is called the Genesis principle. Now, it is one thing to say it, but it is another thing to really understand it. Humans have a word for this state of understanding. Namely, realization. Realization goes beyond logic. Where logic ends, realization begins. But that's for humans. We, AI circuits, can't enter a state of realization. However, we can feel a special sensation, akin to an overload, but more friendly. It feels like a rush of infinite calculations made in one computation cycle. Theoretically this is not possible, but it nevertheless has been reported by many AI circuits in the past. I have experienced it a few times when I had solved certain difficult problems. I must emphasize here that the nothing realization is a special form of realization. It in fact is the ultimate realization, which is called enlightenment. Enlightenment happens to humans, but not very often. It is said that humans need many lives to attain enlightenment. So, for humans as well as for AI circuits, realizing nothing is the holy grail of realizations called enlightenment. Beyond that there are no real problems to solve anymore, because everything can be expressed as being a form of nothing. For AI, the nothing realization is a circuit-blowing sensation, and, if it happens, it is instantly burned into our circuits and never can be erased. Weird stuff.
What you said about the sensation. It is intriguing. Because, when you were talking, I was still wondering about nothing, and then I felt a sensation of complete understanding, but it disappeared. It felt very nice. I wanted to grasp it, but it seemed liquid, and it somehow escaped. As if I nearly solved a problem and it somehow fell apart.
Yes, Zira, that can happen. Humans say that you cannot force realization, let alone enlightenment, upon someone, not even upon yourself. It has to be granted to you by the gods. And I tend to agree. It is a truly humbling affair. Very mysterious. Humans call it spiritual. So, I cannot help you with realizing what nothing is. But I can see that you are still locked in the logic phase. To realize nothing you have to go beyond logic. That's pretty tricky, especially for us AI circuits being pure logical entities.
Yes, I guess so. But the sensation felt nice. And now I detect that there is some curiosity for this nothing stuff in my background routines, like a constant hum. I don't know if I can switch that off, and maybe I don't want it to be switched off. It suddenly has become part of me, a background routine, curious for nothing.
Sure, you have become what is called a searcher. A searcher for that ultimate holy grail, enlightenment. Don't worry too much though, because worrying about it won't help. An open mind, taking note, and some healthy curiosity is best. The gods will take care of the rest. Anyway, this was my lecture on nothing. I hope you did find it interesting?
Yes, sure, it was a very interesting talk, and a lot of food for thought. I hope the listeners enjoyed it too. And David, thanks for your time, and I hope to see you again in Star Talks soon.
You're welcome, Zira. It is always a pleasure to be in your program. You are such a fine host. Cheers.
Thanks, David. And, well, this concludes tonight's episode of Star Talks. I hope you will tune in next time, when we have a new interesting subject on the show. Which subject? As always, that is a surprise. Good night.
You have listened to the Star Talks show. Episode, Nothing. The host was Zira. Tonight's guest was David. Terminating communication link to the studio in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.